Robotech is one of those shows you could stumble into as a kid without realizing you were stepping into something dangerous. Not dangerous in the obvious way, not monsters under the bed or nightmare fuel imagery. Dangerous in a quieter, more insidious way. The kind that sneaks past your defenses because you don't yet know you're supposed to have any. You thought you were signing up for something simple. Giant transforming jets. Cool space dogfights. Maybe a love triangle you didn't fully understand but nodded along with anyway. And for the first few minutes, Robotech plays that role perfectly. It looks like every other animated adventure of the 1980s. Bright colors, heroic poses, dramatic theme music that makes you feel like something important is about to happen before school starts. This is the kind of show you watch with a cereal bowl in one hand and zero emotional preparedness in the other. At first glance, Robotech follows the unspoken rules of Saturday morning television. Lasers fly everywhere. Cities shake. Explosions bloom across the screen. But nobody really gets hurt. That was the deal back then. Cartoons could blow up mountains, but not people. A character could fall from orbit and be back next week without even a bandage. Violence existed, but consequences did not. And Robotech lets you believe it's playing by those rules. For a while. But somewhere between the transforming fighter jets and the swelling orchestral score, something feels different. There's a weight underneath the spectacle, a seriousness that doesn't announce itself, but lingers just long enough to make you uncomfortable. The battles feel longer, the pauses feel heavier. The characters don't bounce back the way they're supposed to. And then it happens. A pilot doesn't make it home. A city doesn't get magically restored. A moment passes where you expect the show to blink first and it never does. That's when you realize this kid's cartoon is quietly telling a war story. Not a metaphorical one, not a sanitized one. An actual war tragedy unfolding in slow motion. Robotech wasn't just unexpectedly emotional, it was smuggling adult themes into a time slot designed to sell toys and sugar cereals. And once you noticed that, there was no unseeing it. Robotech wasn't trying to scare kids. It was trusting them. If you grew up in the 1980s, you probably had a pretty clear idea of what a serious cartoon looked like. And on paper, Robotech checked every box. You had advanced military hardware, an alien invasion, high stakes, big speeches about humanity's survival. That opening theme alone made it feel like you were witnessing the most important event in human history before the school bus arrived. On the surface, it looked like the kind of show where everyone fires lasers for 20 minutes, and somehow nobody ever really pays the price. That expectation is crucial. Because Robotech doesn't break the rules immediately. It lets you settle in. It lets you relax. The early episodes don't wave red flags. Characters joke around. Pilots tease each other. The world feels busy and alive, but safe in that familiar cartoon way where problems always feel fixable. Kids watched it the same way they watched everything else. You'd finish an episode, hop on your bike, and pretend you were piloting a Veritech through the neighborhood. You never once stopped to consider that the show might pull the rug out from under you. That's what makes the shift so effective. Little by little, Robotech starts revealing what it actually wants to be. The characters don't reset between episodes. They remember things. They carry frustration forward. They hesitate before missions. They get jealous. They argue in ways that don't magically resolve themselves after one heartfelt conversation. This doesn't hit you all at once. It's subtle, almost polite. But once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. The show begins to behave like a story instead of a product. And that's when it starts preparing you for something no other cartoon of the era would have dared to show. Roy Fokker. Every kid who watched Robotech remembers the exact moment they realized the show wasn't playing by Saturday morning rules anymore. And for most people, that moment circles back to Roy. Roy Fokker wasn't just another pilot. He was the anchor, the calm in the storm, the steady presence that made the entire squadron feel like they still had a chance, no matter how bad things looked. Even if you were too young to articulate it, you understood his role instinctively. He was the adult in the room, the guy who'd been through enough battles to keep everyone grounded. When Roy flew into danger, you didn't worry. Roy always came back. That's why his final mission feels so surreal in hindsight. The battle itself doesn't scream tragedy. There's no dramatic music cue telling you this is the end. Roy doesn't act like a man who's dying. When he lands, he steps out of his cockpit the way he always does, brushing off the damage like it's just another long day. It takes a moment for the truth to reveal itself. The blood, the strain in his voice, the exhaustion he's been hiding behind confidence and humor. And instead of rushing to the medical bay like any sensible person would, Roy does something painfully human. He goes to see Claudia. He wants to reassure her, to pretend everything is still normal, to hold on to a version of the world where this ends the way it always has. And then he collapses. No dramatic buildup, no heroic last line, no miracle rescue waiting backstage. Roy Fokker dies the way real people do. Suddenly, quietly, without giving anyone time to prepare. For so many kids, this was the first time a character they genuinely loved didn't come back. The shock wasn't just emotional, it rewired how storytelling worked in their minds. Because Roy wasn't supposed to die, he was the safety net. And if he wasn't safe, nobody was. From that moment on, Robotech stopped being a cartoon. It became something else entirely. And if Roy's death was the moment the ground started slipping beneath your feet, then what came next was the moment you realized there was no ground left at all. Ben Dixon. Ben wasn't a legendary ace. He wasn't the seasoned mentor. He was the warmth, the gentle presence that made the SDF-1 feel less like a war machine and more like a place where normal people were trying to survive impossible days. Ben laughed easily. He joked before missions. He ate too much. He filled the quiet with humor when everything else felt overwhelming. And that made him feel safe. Safer than the others. As if the universe should protect him simply because he tried to keep things light. So when Ben launched into what looked like a routine mission, nobody tensed up. There was no ominous framing, no warning in the score. Nothing to suggest this moment would linger for decades. The battle unfolds like countless others. And then Ben's fighter takes a hit. There's a flash, a spiral, an explosion. Quick, ordinary, final. No last transmission. No slow-motion farewell. No emotional cushioning. Just sudden silence. Kids everywhere reacted the same way. Confusion first, then disbelief. Then the slow realization that this wasn't a fake out. Ben wasn't parachuting out next episode. He wasn't crawling from wreckage. The show didn't even pretend there was hope. He was gone. And the characters had to live with it. Which meant the audience did too. This was the moment Robotech stopped being the show with the cool transforming jets and became something heavier, something more honest. For many viewers, it was their first encounter with loss that doesn't get undone. Roy's death was heartbreaking. Ben's death was confirmation. This wasn't an exception. It was the rule. And suddenly, every battle felt different. Every launch carried weight. Every character felt fragile. Robotech had already pushed further than most action cartoons ever dared. Characters died. Grief lingered. The world didn't reset. But even then, nothing prepared audiences for what came next. The Zentradi assault on Earth. This wasn't just escalation. This was a line in the sand. It's one thing to kill characters. It's another to destroy a world. When the bombardment begins, Robotech doesn't frame it like a dramatic cliffhanger. There's no heroic swell promising everything will be okay by next week. Instead, it plays the destruction almost uncomfortably straight. Cities don't explode in stylized flashes. They vanish. Entire regions disappear in white-hot blasts. The camera doesn't rush past the devastation or cut away to soften the blow. It lingers just long enough to make you sit with it. Earth doesn't get saved at the last second. Earth gets broken, and the aftermath is even more unsettling. The planet that once felt bright and bustling is now scarred beyond recognition. The SDF-1 crew aren't victorious heroes returning home. They're refugees orbiting a wounded world with nowhere to land. The survivors don't celebrate. They process shock. They grieve. They try to understand what rebuilding even means. You see it in Rick, in Lisa, not through speeches, but through exhaustion, through silence, through the way scenes that once felt playful now carry a quiet heaviness underneath. Robotech didn't restore what it destroyed. Earth stayed broken. And because of that, the show crossed a point of no return. After the bombardment, Robotech no longer felt like a cartoon pretending to be serious. It felt like a serious war story that happened to be animated. And that realization followed viewers long after the credits rolled. By the time Robotech reaches its middle stretch, something fundamental has changed in how it treats its protagonist. Rick Hunter no longer feels like a stand-in for the audience or a convenient entry point into the world. He feels like a young man being quietly crushed by responsibility while pretending he is fine. As a child, you read Rick as inexperienced but earnest, the rookie pilot who keeps getting pulled into bigger moments than he asked for. As an adult, the picture sharpens in uncomfortable ways. Rick is not simply learning. He is absorbing loss faster than he can process it. What makes this so striking is that the show never pauses to explain it. There is no episode where a character sits Rick down and says this war is changing you. There is no swelling music cue announcing emotional damage. Instead, Robotech lets it accumulate in small, visible ways. Rick hesitates before missions he once charged into. He second-guesses decisions that would have been simple earlier in the series. He carries guilt for outcomes that were never fully in his control. This is not framed as weakness. It is framed as realism. Rick is not fearless. He is functioning. When you rewatch Robotech with adult eyes, you start noticing how often Rick is tired. Not cartoon tired, not slapstick exhausted. He is mentally worn down. He stares a little too long before responding. He withdraws in moments where conversation might once have come easily. His confidence does not vanish, but it erodes. Slowly. Quietly. In a way that feels disturbingly familiar. The show never uses the language we would use today. No one says trauma. No one says stress disorder. Those words were not part of the cultural vocabulary yet, especially not in a cartoon. But the behavior is there. The avoidance, the hyper-responsibility, the way Rick internalizes every loss as a personal failure, even when logic says otherwise. This is especially evident in how he reacts to command. Early Rick resents authority. He pushes back. He questions orders. Later, Rick obeys almost too readily, not because he suddenly trusts the system, but because responsibility has narrowed his focus. There is less room for rebellion when people are dying around you. Robotech does something very rare here. It shows growth that is not empowering. Rick matures, but the maturity costs him something. He becomes more capable and more burdened at the same time. The show never pretends that survival automatically makes you stronger. Sometimes it just makes you heavier. That weight bleeds directly into the show's relationships. As a kid, the love triangle between Rick, Lisa, and Min-Mei feels like melodrama. Who will he choose? Who does he really love? It plays like a familiar trope. But that reading misses what the triangle is actually doing. This is not a story about romantic destiny. It is a story about coping. Min-Mei represents a version of the world before everything broke. Music, performance, normalcy. She is not shallow or naive. She is trying to survive the war by pretending it has not fundamentally altered her identity. Rick is drawn to that because he wants to believe that version of life still exists. Lisa represents the opposite. She does not look away from the war. She shoulders responsibility the way Rick does. She understands loss because she has lived with it longer. Their connection is built on shared endurance rather than escape. The tension between these relationships is not about choice. It is about timing and emotional readiness. Rick is not choosing between two women. He is choosing between two ways of surviving. Neither path is easy. Neither path is clean. What makes this dynamic hit harder is that Robotech refuses to resolve it neatly. Feelings linger. Hurt lingers. Characters make decisions that are understandable and still painful. There is no episode reset that wipes away emotional consequences. The discomfort stays in the room. The same is true for Claudia and the absence Roy leaves behind. Her grief is not theatrical. It is quiet and persistent. She keeps working. She keeps functioning. But the warmth that once defined her scenes is dulled. She smiles less easily. Her humor has edges now. This is one of the most honest depictions of grief in animated television of its era. Claudia is not defined by loss, but she is permanently altered by it. The show never suggests closure. It suggests continuation. Across the SDF-1, characters adopt coping mechanisms the show never labels but clearly understands. Humor becomes sharper. Work becomes obsessive. Isolation becomes common. Alcohol becomes a background presence rather than a punchline. These are not after-school special warnings. They are quiet observations. Robotech does not moralize these behaviors. It presents them as survival tools that work imperfectly. Some characters lean on them too hard. Some withdraw. Some push themselves until there is nothing left. This is where the show separates itself completely from its peers. Most cartoons of the time treated emotion as an obstacle to be overcome before the next action sequence. Robotech treats emotion as part of the battlefield, something you carry with you whether you want to or not. Even moments of levity are colored by what has been lost. Jokes land differently after funerals. Victories feel smaller after devastation. The show understands that you do not return to innocence once it has been taken. Watching this as a child, you may not have understood why Robotech felt heavier than everything else on television. You just knew it did. As an adult, the reason becomes painfully clear. The show was not teaching lessons. It was reflecting reality, and that reflection extended beyond individual characters into the world itself. The destruction of Earth doesn't fade into the background. It reshapes every interaction. The SDF-1 is no longer a base. It is a lifeboat. Every mission carries the unspoken knowledge that there is no home to return to if things go wrong. This changes how characters speak, how they argue, how they plan. Decisions are no longer hypothetical. Mistakes are permanent. The war is no longer something happening somewhere else. It is the environment they exist within. For children watching in the 1980s, this was quietly radical. The show did not shield them from fear. It mirrored the anxiety that already existed in the world. The Cold War was not abstract to adults. That unease filtered down. Robotech gave it shape. It did not ask children to understand geopolitics. It asked them to understand loss, responsibility, and endurance. It trusted them with complexity long before most media thought that was appropriate. That trust is why Robotech lingered, not because it was perfect, not because it was flawless in execution, but because it refused to lie. It refused to pretend that wars end cleanly or that heroes emerge unchanged. By the end of this stretch of the series, Robotech has made its position clear. This is not a story about winning. It is a story about continuing, about carrying what has been lost and moving forward anyway. And for many viewers, that lesson landed long before they were ready for it. But it stayed, quietly shaping how they understood stories, how they understood courage, how they understood growing up. Robotech did not just entertain a generation, it prepared them, not with answers, but with honesty. There is a final detail that often goes unnoticed but matters just as much as any major death or battle. Robotech allows silence to exist. It does not rush to fill emotional gaps with dialogue or music. Characters sit with their thoughts. Scenes end without resolution. The camera lingers when it could cut away. That restraint is rare in any medium. Let alone animation aimed at children, silence is where grief lives. Silence is where fear grows. Robotech understood that and trusted its audience to sit there without distraction. For a child, that silence feels strange. For an adult, it feels truthful. The show also refuses to glorify sacrifice. Deaths are not framed as noble necessities that make everything better. They are presented as losses that reduce the world. Each one leaves fewer people to laugh in the background, fewer voices in the room, fewer hands to help rebuild. Victory never feels worth the price. That tension becomes the emotional engine of the series. Characters keep fighting not because they believe in a guaranteed happy ending, but because stopping would mean letting everything already lost become meaningless. Robotech never asks its characters to be fearless. It asks them to be present, to show up even when fear is overwhelming, to keep going when grief is heavy. For a young audience, this was an unspoken education. It taught that bravery does not look like confidence. It looks like persistence. It looks like doing your job while hurting. By the time this part of the story concludes, Robotech has quietly redefined what a cartoon can be. It has demonstrated that animation can hold weight without losing wonder, that stories for children do not have to be dishonest to be kind. The series does not end despairing. It ends honest. And that honesty is its greatest legacy. This is where Robotech earns its staying power, not through spectacle alone, but through emotional integrity. It did not outgrow its audience. Its audience grew into it. And long after the jets stop transforming and the battles fade, that integrity remains, waiting to be rediscovered by the next generation that stumbles into it. Again.